Let's start with Exodus itself, 15:22. What did you read? What did you see here differently as you read? And or what did our author point out that made you go, I didn't remember that, or I didn't know that?
I especially appreciate the verbal history that continues, and I think that's something we don't do enough, maybe because we're so much into literary that Moses that they sing this song and that this is something that will continue. And when he finishes it, the Lord will reign forever and ever. I think that's something that's really a beautiful, beautiful song at the beginning. Of course, later on things get. And I love Mary. Now it seems to me they just give a couple verses of Miriam's song, and I thought hers was longer.
There you go. We think things because the beautiful lyricists who make those things into music put make them longer or shorter as it goes. I don't quite remember.
Maybe they were busy with the tambourine, and that's why she only did two verses.
I don't remember the Song of Moses being quite so long.
No,
Yeah.
I thought Miriam's was.
Yeah.
So there you go. Miriam's only got a couple of lines here.
I was not
Well, I was struck.
Let's go Jane Korsberg and then Catherine.
yeah. 15 23, somewhere in there. Oh, that is why it was called Mara. Mara meaning bitter. And if you look at the same word in Ruth, where she calls herself bitter, it's spelled different and it means bitterness.
Uh-huh.
I just love things like that.
Yeah, good.
I tell you, I think it's weird. I have a friend who called her daughter Mara. I don't think she knew the meaning of the word.
Yeah.
Catherine, what do you got?
Oh, I was just struck by, can you hear me correctly? I don't know if.
Yes, we can
Okay,
hear you.
because you guys are all breaking up, so, it, let's see, 15, verse 26. If you listen carefully to the voice of the Lord your God and do what is right, give heed to his commandments, keep his statutes, I will not bring upon you any of the diseases that I brought upon the Egyptians, for I am the Lord who heals you. So those seemed really different. I mean, you gotta follow these statutes, follow these ordinances.
I thought
And then I am the Lord who heals you, which seems very much more holistic and organic. I heal you.
Mhm. Okay.
that passage or that section, it seems like the blessings are conditional, right? When you read that.
Yeah.
But
And
they are all the way through.
Okay,
I struggled with that. Like,
Yeah.
wait a minute. And then I asked myself, is that because that's how I'm reading it? Is that, like I really wondered. I kept reading that part over, like, and then going to other parts of the Bible where seems conditional too. And yet then when we get into the New Testament, there's more parts, the grace is more evident, and yet grace is really evident in the Old Testament too. So how do we put those two together, right?
They're great questions.
I wonder then, are we supposed to put it together?
Are we supposed to what?
Put it together. Is it our job to make it like really linear, or is that important? Do I need to?
Yeah.
Maybe it has something to do with time and place.
Yeah.
Well, and from the very beginning, though, God says to Abraham, even from the beginning, if you will, and when he says to the people at the beginning of Exodus, if is, if you will, that I am the Lord your God, you need to follow me. And that this is where the upsetment comes when they don't follow, when they have the other gods and the other idols, and when they don't follow it. So that, and I always kind of thought it was for their the if and the please follow for their well-being, the health, for their safety, for their well-being, that God is saying, I need you to do this. And maybe also because of their understanding at the time. Ooh, sorry, folks, I just got dizzy. Don't know why.
Oh,
The time of the when the Exodus is written, which fascinated me later on as we get into it, the fact of the when about Exodus being written and the parts of it. We'll talk about that later. But anyway, that was my theory about the if business.
Sharon,
just, oh,
let's go Sharon and then Catherine.
Throughout certainly the Hebrew Bible, and one could say in the New Testament as well. I mean, who sends their child to death? God seems very quixotic. And maybe that's just because so many different hands were stirring the pot.
So,
And because there seems to be no real way to mesh some of
yeah.
these looks at God.
Yeah.
And no way to reconcile that jealous God with the God of grace.
Catherine?
well, it's just that whole way that's set up. If you do this, then I will do that.
It sounds very
No, it's-
transactional.
Yeah.
Yeah. But
So-
then, for I am the Lord who heals you.
Yeah. Yeah.
So that then becomes much more open and loving
Let's see if we
than
can. Let's see if we can um, reframe a little bit. So, what if we try to begin to understand this from not God's perspective, because God is God and we are not, but from our human perspective and experience, as one who is a kind of just imagine the storytelling that is happening here. So, if your experience is an experience of great disaster, I mean, Peter Enns has already pointed out to us that we need to read, for example, the plagues, not from a natural perspective, but from a perspective of storytelling, in which the storyteller knows that there are all of these gods that people swear their loyalty to. And it is evident for the storytellers that there is just one God. Now, how do they come by that? Well, that's one of those, I think, articles of faith that we come to understand. But let's just say that that the storytelling is from the perspective of the storyteller, not from God's perspective. And it is about describing the God who is active in the life of God's people. And God's people, the storytellers, are experiencing God in all sorts and kinds of ways. And one of the ways they tell about that is this conditional piece, that if you do this, then this happens. So then God will make this happen. It does leave room for the grace and the love that we assign to God. At the very same time, it shows us that the people who came before us feel a lot like we feel. That sometimes it seems like it's transactional. If I do this, God, then God, you do that, or God will do that. If humanity does this, then God does this, transaction. And we believe differently. We believe that God's grace is great enough that it is bestowed on everyone, whether or not we sort of are part of that or we agree to that transaction, or we don't think there's a transaction at all. And I think that line you've been pointing out, Catherine, I am the Lord who heals you. Did Peter Ann say anything specifically about that line? Because I think
No.
here it is on page 98 at the top. I recall that God's judgment on Egypt began with the first plague when God made the waters of Egypt undrinkable. Well, what do you know? The Israelites now find themselves in the same predicament. Perhaps this entire episode is an object lesson or a stern warning about obedience to God. The Lord is their healer. If they obey, they will not suffer from the same diseases Yahweh brought upon the Egyptians. Rather, they will be healed, just as they were when the bitter waters were made sweet. So again, it is the if-then that language that we experience, and at the same time, that's the only way human beings can write about God, isn't it? I mean, how do you avoid all that, Annetta?
I think it's helpful for me the way you said it's from the human perspective, because then from our perspective, it's kind of like there's this idea that when you're and I don't know that this isn't theologically correct, but it's the door says choose me on the outside, but then when we walk through it and we look back on the other side, it says I chose you.
Yeah.
I
And
love that, Ken.
and I think that that's part of this, right? Is there's our perspective of how it works in our humanness, and
Yes.
then there's God's perspective of how it really works in eternity. And so turning that phrase of men wrote this book, not it's about God, right?
Right.
And we're trying to understand God in our humanness. That helps me it helps me understand it differently. But I do think that sometimes we try really hard, too hard maybe, to put all the puzzle pieces together.
We do.
Intellect.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
Work
Yeah.
at it.
Yeah. And I think that this this line, I am the Lord who heals you. I mean, that's what Anne said about the plagues, that it's sort of the chaos and resolution of chaos. Healing is the resolution of chaos, is it not? When a body, for example, attacks itself, and that is what cancer is, the resolution of that chaos is healing. And that healing can take place physically because we have all sorts of drugs and ways to intervene into that, and to create some order out of those cancer cells. But healing is also more than physical healing. And that, I think, is how we understand God's activity in our own healing, is that is creating I mean, order is not quite the word I want because I'm not thinking about all the ducks in a row kind of order. I'm thinking about a well-ordered heart, a heart that is turned toward love, a heart that is turned toward all of the lovingness that we have been shown in Jesus. And that healing is so if I stayed with that metaphor of order out of chaos, healing also has to do with the ultimate order of that God brings out of chaos, and that's our alignment with God after this physical body is finished with its life on earth. That is also healing. We just don't have the
Words.
yeah, exactly, Anne. We just don't have the words to and it has to be from our perspective. That's the only way we can tell a story is from our own perspective. We can try and get into the shoes of someone else. I was thinking when I was down in Palm Springs at my friend's house, I would sit at the kitchen table, and in her kitchen, she has a window that's way, way at the top of the wall. It's about, 6 inches lower than the ceiling. Long and narrow. And if I look through that window, I would describe to you these 2 huge elephant legs. That is my perspective when looking out. That's my point of view when looking out that window. Well, if I walk outside and around, what I see are these 2 huge palm trees. But I think that happens so much is that we forget that so much of our storytelling is we have to understand perspective and bias. We have to understand bias. We have to understand the agenda here. The agenda in this book is about belief in the one God, not in all of the household gods, not in the gods you carry around with you in your pocket. And that's, we don't have those things anymore. Well, I shouldn't say that.
You don't? How about that little square box you carry?
Oh yeah, you're right. Well, it's rectangular really, but yeah. For many, you're exactly right, Jane. Shouldn't even laugh at that. Sharon, you were going to jump in.
Well, I was just thinking that if we carry this metaphor, the Bible, trying to understand God from a human perspective is like the story of the blind man and the elephant.
Yeah, well, that's right.
The story of the what?
The blind man and the elephant.
I never heard that.
One feels the leg and says, this is what it is. And one feels the trunk and says, this is what it is. And the ear, the side, and the tail. They never put it together because they can't see it.
They can't see it for the whole. Yeah, I think that's incredibly, and which is why I think it's a legitimate question when we are in a faith community, and even when we're not in a faith community, it's a legitimate question to ask. Tell me about that God that you see. Tell me about that God that you hear. Tell me about that God, because every single one of us has just a little itsy bitsy piece of understanding, and together we get so much more wonderfully multifaceted view of who God is, which is why it's sinful to say there's only one way.
Well, it's
Well,
like
and-
Jane's conversation with the Muslim man.
That's right. It's Jane's conversation with the Muslim man. There isn't one way. And Sharon, you were going to jump in?
Well, and and the story of the plagues and the story of, if you obey me, this is what I'll do
Mhm.
here in Exodus. It's like proof that the prosperity gospel proponents have always been here.
Yeah, yeah,
If you do this,
Ben.
I'll do that.
Yeah,
Transactionalism.
yeah.
The interesting thing, though, is if you think about Exodus and you think about that passage of, this passage that we're discussing where it seems transactional, they just witnessed a God who didn't make life easy for the Egyptians.
Mhm.
And so they have a fear of this God. And so it makes sense to think about the reaction to it is if you do these things, you don't have to worry about that stuff we watched.
Which it says that they're talking about the Egyptians.
Yeah.
Yeah. And
That's kind of
it
an
gets back
interesting
to
translation.
Well,
I'm sorry.
let's let Sharon finish that thought, and then Ann, you show us your translation.
that what Annetta was saying is true, but it's like that not all Egyptians, not all of us feel this way. And yet, why does it happen that all Egyptians were punished
Yeah.
so fearfully
No.
when it was Pharaoh,
Mhm.
whose heart was hardened by God?
It's so
It's
complicated.
just,
Mhm.
it makes belief sometimes difficult.
Yeah.
Mhm. Yeah. Yeah.
Where we walk by faith and not by sight.
Well, then,
Thank God.
Well, let's let
And
Ann
then-
Captain, let's let Ann, she was gonna jump in with some
Well, it was kind of trivia. It was just the translation, and I'm on 26, the bottom of 1526, where he says, I will not bring you any of the diseases. I will not bring them, for I'm the God who heals you. And you begin to wonder what is the point of the healing? Where is the healing needed? And my Bible and Sharon says that the new revelation, the character of God as a healer, which we from this century and earlier centuries can carry over into Jesus as the healer.
Mhm.
God is the healer there, beginning it. But yeah, it just and he too says they're conditional law.
Yeah, that's
So it's
there's conditions in there. Okay, Catherine.
Oh, this is just nothing really. It's just, there's a lot of humor in this story. Like verse, 17, chapter 17, verse 3, the people thirsted for water, complained against Moses and said, why did you bring us out of Egypt to kill us and our children and livestock with thirst? So Moses cried out to the Lord, what shall I do with this people? They are almost ready to stone me.
Yeah, that it sounds like that, you gotta love them, but oh, can we really live with them, right?
So,
Yeah.
absolutely.
Oh, yeah.
And the patience in the storytelling here of the narrator who says, of God who says, okay, go ahead, take your staff, strike the rock. Now, I have a question about that as I got there, because that same sentence is later in Exodus when Moses strikes the rock when he's not supposed to.
Mhm.
And I thought, oh, strike the rock so that people may drink, and its own, and then he calls it Meribah, which means
I
it's
drank
Lord.
from that fountain.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, and Ann's talks about that. On page 98, jumping ahead to chapter. So he talks about these three water stories.
Mhm.
And he talks about in chapter 17, the third story about the water, and the Israelites are camped at Rephidim, and they quarrel and complain. And then this time, the solution is for Moses to take his staff, the same staff he used during the plagues, and strike the rock at Horeb. Since Horeb is an alternate name for Sinai, this means that Moses and some of the elders are to go on ahead to Sinai. Horeb, well, they will whack at a rock, and the water will flow from it all the way back to the people at Rephidim. As a memorial to these events, Moses renames Rephidim Massa and Meribah, test and quarrel. This life-giving water is the never-ending story of the Israelites complaining. I just find it. And the manna then. I love that. I mean, that just think of that too. You get manna. This bread is flaky frost like dew on the morning ground, kind of like cornflakes. And then we have the first breakfast cereal, unlikely. The Israelites are confused, which is why they call it manna, which in Hebrew means, what is it?
I once found a recipe for manna,
Oh my gosh.
and it had three little coriander seeds on the top, and it was made with honey and flour. And I made them for my daughter's like first or second grade classroom. It was sort of fun. Got some manna for you, kids.
What is it? I get that question. I
I
used to
always thought manna meant bread.
bread from heaven. That's what I did too. So I would get that question when I was at St. Andrews in Rapid City, because in the time period I was there, we never used wafers. 12 years of never using wafers. I always had a good loaf of bread. And so, well, never is a big word. So if the bread didn't get there, right? Somebody didn't bake it, or we didn't get to Great Harvest to pick it up, whatever happened, and I had to use wafers, inevitably I would get a child who would come for communion and get that wafer in their hand, and they'd look at me and say, "What's that?
Oh, I love it.
What's that?" The same question. What is it? Well,
It's wonderful.
I guess it's bread.
The word that struck me was water. Because there's a lot of talk about water in this chapter, but then also in the readings. And we were just in Arizona in the desert and did a lot of walking in the desert. And the first thing you grab is the bottle of water.
Mhm.
And you put it in your bag, and that's the most important thing, more important than your ID, right?
Yeah.
You carry your water with you. And I'm really good at growing cactus because they only have to be watered once a month. And if you do it 3 weeks, it's okay. If you do it 4 weeks, okay. And if you go to 5, they still like you. And so I thought about that lack of water and our need for water. I pondered it a lot. And my mother, in her final days, she didn't drink, and she couldn't drink, and they kept saying she shouldn't still be alive. She hasn't had anything except a drop on her tongue, and how life-giving even that drop was in her final days. And I just thought a lot about water and how important it is. And then I wondered what it would be like to be the Israelites in the desert, because I only liked it in the morning. It was cool. And I mean, there's just a lot to think about in the idea of water and the lack of it. And how does that make you feel? I was thankful that by 2 o'clock every afternoon we could be in air conditioning. And we were there in February, right? And it's just a lot to kind of ponder their lives. And what was it like during that? And they just had this very traumatic experience. And their ancestors had this really traumatic experience. And I just really thought about that. And I thought I'd share those, like the humanness of those people and what they experienced.
Yeah, we often just go ahead with looking at them as complaining and saying they shouldn't. I'm switching
And
to
a story. We think of it as a story.
Yeah.
Rather than applying ourselves into those bodies and trying to feel that.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
Very good. If I may, on page 99, I was really struck by where he says the Sabbath, verse 26, the scene makes of resting on the Sabbath day. And then he says the 10 commandments are, and this is the third paragraph down on 99, aren't necessarily new commandments, but it's out of place to see a Sabbath command at this point before the command is actually given. Then, and this is what struck me. There is another piece of evidence. Exodus was written well after the time it portrays.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Such things as the Sabbath keeping were part of Israel's rhythm of life at that point, where he's looking back on an earlier time. And of course, our fundamentalist friends would say, well, Moses wrote it. Well, if this is true, Moses wasn't around, folks.
Yeah, yeah.
Maybe Joshua had a good stylus.
Right, right.
I said stylus, then pencil.
And that's, I mean, and that's why we can understand this literature as storytelling. This is told, and every story is told in hindsight. In hindsight, you remember stuff the way you think it goes through your own lenses and biases. And then, as we all know, there's at least 2 editors, if not more, after all of this story stuff got told. I want to move us forward just a little bit because I think Enns has some really good sort of comments to make. So I'm looking at page 104. And he's got a couple of sort of theological points to make that I think are, Moses is up and down and up and down and up and down the mountain, or that I find that really, really fascinating. But on the paragraph on page 104 that begins with moving on, 2 points at this stage in the journey are worth highlighting. The first is that the Israelites are to be a priestly kingdom and a holy nation. That's in 19 verse 6. I believe that's 19 verse 6. Yeah, priestly kingdom and a holy nation. And when God first calls Moses to come up the mountain, God lays down the essence of God's relationship with Israel. I brought you out of Egypt, and now in response, you are to obey my commands. If you do, you will be my special people out of all the peoples of the earth, namely a priestly kingdom and a holy nation. The heart of the matter, we might say the very reason Israel was delivered from Egypt, is captured in this phrase, priestly kingdom and a holy nation. And then the next paragraph, priests mediate between the divine and human. To be holy means to be set apart, sectioned off, so to speak. Israel, if obedient to God, will be set apart to be the mediator between God and other kingdoms. So I just find that, and then at the top of the next page, Israel's true purpose is now revealed. They are not an elite God club isolated from the world. Rather, they are a people separated for the purpose of bringing the nation to a knowledge of God. What do we do with all of that when we...
I thought that was really astounding because I've read Exodus several times, and I was really struck by how clear that directive was when he pointed it out. Its whole plan was for it to bring the nations, not nations as in like kings and queens, but all the peoples to God, to show God, to be that witness for God. It seems so clear when he says it.
When he says it, it does, doesn't it? Sharon?
And I was curious about how they were to do it. I mean, it's clear from a Christian perspective.
Yeah.
It's not clear at all to me from a Jewish perspective. Jews do not proselytize.
They don't.
Jews do not look for converts. So is it just by living a what we would call a godly life and hoping other people saw it as
Mhm.
something to attain.
So,
Uh,
is that the adherence to the law? I mean, at this point, is that what bringing the nations to a knowledge of God is about? And also remembering that this is looking backwards, right? So here we are, this people called Israel, um, and our core belief is around this God who is creator, and bringer of order out of chaos. So how do we show forth God? And one of those ways, I mean, isn't that what isn't that what the law is about? Is creating order out of chaos. It's doing things in order. It's keeping order. It's making sure that this doesn't, I mean, there's all sorts of things about that. And then there's this other thing that I find really fascinating and that's about keeping holy, um, keeping separate, keeping uh, pure, maybe. Is that another word? If obedient to God, will be set apart to be the mediator between God and others. So to me, that gives really clear direction for adhering to the law. If we're going to be the mediator, I mean, if the Jews are going to be the mediator.
But that's kind of I thought he kind of made a leap there. I mean, it doesn't say that in the Bible. It says, "You shall be for me a priestly kingdom
Mhm.
and a holy nation."
Mhm.
Doesn't say really anything about him being, just because they're priests doesn't necessarily mean they're mediators for the whole world. I thought he made kind of a real leap there.
Yeah. We also need to remember that our understanding of
I
priest.
also love how
Yes. Oh.
it said, "You've seen what I did to the Egyptians and how I bore you on eagle wings
Mhm.
and brought you to myself." That's beautiful.
What
And
verse
is that
is
where the
from?
eagle's wings hymn comes from?
Uh,
Or
Isaiah
That comes from the Psalm, Catherine.
and Isaiah.
And
So
that's-
in Genesis 12:3, which he quotes on page page 104, it says, "I will make of you a great nation, and I will bless you and make your name great, so that you will be a blessing." And he quotes that verse, and then he uses that as
okay.
as he leads into mediator. And I think I see that because of that, I see that differently than a rule maker as much as a witness. We're the witness that shows the greatness of God. That's what the setting apart is. And I do believe that that's what evangelism is that we are different and that I mean, they'll know us by our love, right? They'll
Right.
know that we're different. They'll feel, and I think that that's what makes a bigger impact than knocking on a door and leaving a pamphlet and walking away. Or like in many Northern European countries, they'd wake up and look at the church to figure out if the king died and they were now Lutheran or Catholic, right? Which one are we this week? And I think, I mean, it wasn't weekly, but you know what I mean? It was that they changed based on who the king was. And I think that the idea is that that's not our job to lay down this law, but to be witnesses by our lives and our love and our, yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
So I think that maybe we look at that word, because when I read this, I thought, wow, holiness has a very law-centric perspective. A lot of times people have a perspective of, oh, that makes them better than other people, but it's set apart. That's a completely different vision
Hmm.
than better. It's like pulled apart. Why do you pull aside a child who needs a little extra loving attention in a classroom? Right? You pull them apart, or maybe they need to be told that they really are really good at this. They need a little, I don't know. I'm just thinking about different ways to look at setting apart rather than setting above, because I think that's sometimes what happens with holiness. It's set above.
Yes,
Yeah, I
absolutely.
think you're right there.
Yep.
And there's a whole groups of people who will set themselves apart and talk about a holiness code.
Right.
And that sense, that's in that sense, it feels more like being set above rather than set.
Mhm.
Yeah.
If I may, on page 106, I love the last part. Second to the last line where he says, the Exodus story is more than deliverance, which why they show the 10 Commandments on Holy Week on the TV, I'll never understand. Well, it's about Passover, I guess. Anyway, it's about how which is what he's talking about here. Passovering, how they move Passover into the service of Yahweh,
Mhm.
how they can conduct themselves as God's chosen people and learn about what it is.
Mhm. Well, and then his very last sentence, law and tabernacle. Only when
Yeah.
these things are in place will the Israelites be ready to enter Canaan as a priestly kingdom and holy nation. And that is what the rest of Exodus is about.
So then the question is, how do we become a priestly people? And what is the rest of our story?
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah. Exactly. Yeah. Well, and so that's that's a question about how do we write our own story? How do we write a story of love? How do we write a story of justice and
A story that's still ongoing.
exactly.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
And
And
will
it's
be, I guess,
collectively ours, right?
Yeah.
It's not just a single one person.
Yeah. Yeah.
Good stuff.
Okay.
Chapter
We will-
11.
We'll do 11 next week, and then we have 12 and
and
then
13. Say, people, can I interrupt a second? Kathy, and especially Jane and Simon and Sharon, I found out last night that Karen Whitford did not get taken out of ICU. She's still in ICU, and now they've put her on dialysis.
yeah.
Yeah.
And we really need to continue those storming the gates things.
Okay.
Yeah.
Wanted to remind myself to say that, and for Monty and Penny and Kim, all of those.
So if
Thank
we
you.
do 11 next week and then 12 and 13
Right. I think
the
we have
week after, because
weeks left.
13 is like two and a
Okay.
half pages.
Yeah. Yeah. And so I think we have 2 weeks left on this. Sharon has suggested to us a possibility that we pivot to read the Amen Effect. It really would not be a Bible study. It would be a book study if we chose to pivot in this direction.
Yeah, because what she quotes mostly is Talmud.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, so it's all Old Testament stuff and it's great stuff.
Which would give us a good understanding of the Old Testament that we have been reading.
Yeah. Yeah.
I have to admit, Beth went ahead and ordered both books for me at once, and here I am sitting with the Amen Effect. And so
Good.
I don't know if you decide not to do it, if anybody wants to buy something.
Oh, it's a great book, whether we do it or not. It's a great book. It's good. I'm willing to go that route for us to pivot to this for a time to help us sort of integrate all of this Old Testament stuff and then move on to Genesis. We talked about that, and we can consider that as a next possibility.
Who are
So,
you thinking of with Genesis? More Peter Enns or somebody else?
The Genesis book that I was looking at is Peter Enns and Jared Byas,
Yeah,
who is his partner
yeah,
in the Bible for Normal People podcast,
it's good.
and who is not nearly as snarky as Peter.
Oh, shoot.
And he, I think, didn't he grow up in a Roman Catholic tradition?
I
in
don't
Corsberg?
know too much about him.
I can't remember if that's the case or not, but I think he's younger than Peter Enns,
Okay.
who is, I guess, probably in his early 60s, maybe. And I think he's interesting.
Okay.
so
Okay.
I wanted to talk about the Amen effect a minute. Sharon, in your email, you suggested that we would do it in 1 or 2 sessions. So then would you suggest we read the entire book and discuss it in its entirety, or that we read part of it and discuss? Because I think that that's going to just determine how long it takes us, and we should have an idea. Because you suggested one or two meetings.
Where we should look and see what we want to do in terms of Holy Week and stuff
That was
like that.
another mention I was thinking about, yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
Who
Well,
is the
I was assuming
author of
skip
The Man
over.
Effect?
Well, why don't we all
Sharon Brous, Brous.
So let's go get a hold of this book. Yeah, there might be used copies available by now if you
I don't think I found any,
you didn't. Okay.
but I didn't look everywhere in the world.
So if you need help finding it, ask Sharon. She's got spots that the rest of us don't. Forget
Well, not really. I think it was Jane Korsberg who told me about these spots.
Thank you.
So we'll have 2 more weeks, and that brings us to Holy Week, does it not?
Yeah.
I assume
Yeah,
it's
so we
very
wouldn't
busy.
meet on Good Friday.
So then we have Good Friday. Let me see where my map here is. Google
At least I'm assuming we wouldn't meet on Good Friday, but we
Um,
could.
let's see where Good Friday is.
The
18th.
18th of
18th. So we have the 4th. April 4th is next Friday.
mhm.
And then April 11th, and we'll finish Exodus.
I think we should take a break on Holy Week.
Okay, so let's break for Good Friday. I'm going to watch Jesus Christ Superstar, if anybody wants to watch it with me. And then the 25th is Easter week, so shall we plan on starting in effect then?
Yeah.
We can do that.
Okay.
Yeah.
And I think that we should, if you can read, it's not a big, huge book and it's not a hard read. So, read as much of it as you are happy to read, and we'll kind of split it up into a couple of conversations.
Now, see, when you did it at camp, did you do it in 2 sessions?
There was at least 2, but we didn't cover as much as I really wished I'd covered. So,
Well, do you want, I think maybe 3.
yeah, I think 3 would be good. Because there's just so much conversation to be had
Okay.
about this.
Mhm.
Sharon, would you please send me the name and author so I can
Sure.
order it?
Sharon Grover, am I going to see you around 11 o'clock?
No, after I feed my crew here breakfast, I'm going to start making the trays for lunch tomorrow.
Okay, you're doing the meat and what have you. All right, I'm going to be over with my stuff and pray that it thaws in time. I will see you all next week. Some of you I'll see sooner.
Okay.
Wonderful, wonderful discussion. Thank you.
We'll see ya.
Bye.
Bye-bye.